join clause, and group join clause. In this video, we are going to explore how to use both clauses to combine data from different sources. We will cover the basics of these clauses, their syntax, and some common use cases. So let's get started. Join in general is to combine data from different collections. In general, join has two types, inner join and outer join. Outer join consists of three types, left outer join, right outer join, and full outer join. So, in general there are four join types. Let's understand what does each one mean using the following example. I have two data tables, customers, and orders. Customers table contains information about the customers. The primary key in this table is the column customer ID. Orders table contains different orders. The orders are for the customers. Each customer could have no orders, only one order, or different orders. The primary key for this table is the column order ID. The column customer ID here is to define which order belongs to which customer. In other words, the column customer ID in the second table is to connect both tables with each other. And I have an output table, where I want to store the result of join. This table contains the following four columns. The first two columns are from the first table, and the second two columns are from the second table. I can define any columns I need from both tables, or also new columns. For now I will only use these four columns. I need these three tables to explain the different join types. Let's start with the first one, inner join. This join type returns only the items that have matching keys in both collections. The key in this example is the column customer ID. The output of inner join will be only the rows where the ID is the same in both tables. For example, the first table has in the first row the ID number 1. We check the second table if any row has the same ID in the column customer ID. As you see, we have only one row where the ID is 1. So, we have one matching row. In this case we take both rows from both tables and add them in the output table. This is the first row in the output table. Then we check the second row. The ID here is number 2. So, we check the second table if any row has the ID number 2. As you see, there are two rows where the ID is 2. So, we take both rows as matching rows. This means, we add the row from the first table with the first matching row. Then we do the same for the second matching row. Now we have 3 rows in the output table. Then we go back to the first table and check the next row. The ID here is number 3. The second table doesn't contain any row with the ID number 3. So, there is no matching row for this row. In this case we don't add anything to the output table. And we checked all rows in the first table. So, inner join is done and we have the following table as result. This is how does inner join work in general. The column names are the same in both tables, customer ID, but they must not be always the same. For example, I can use the name customer ID for the first table, and the name ID for the second table. So, you can use any name you want for both columns. I use the same name to make it easier for you to know that I am checking the content of these columns. One last thing you have to learn about inner join is that we can use both clauses to implement inner join, either join clause or group join clause. But I recommend you to use join clause to implement inner join, and I will always use this clause for inner join. Let's now see how does the syntax of join clause look like. We normally have at the beginning from clause, for example this one. It's what we learnt in from clause video, once we want to query the rows of a data table. So, using from clause we define the first table. After that we set join clause. The syntax for join clause is similar to from clause. We set join, then we define a variable for the rows, for example this one. After that we write in, then the second table. In this way I define both tables, what I want to join. Now we have to set the condition for join. So, here we have to use the key to match both tables. To do that, I will first write on, then the first key from the first table in this way, then equals, then the second key from the second table. As you see, I use the variable of the first table to set the first key, and also the variable of the second table to set the second key. This is how to use join clause in general. I wrote the statements in 3 lines, but I can also write them in 2 lines in this way. There is no difference between both queries. After that, we can use select clause to select the data we want from both tables. Let's now switch to UiPath to see how to implement inner join in UiPath using join clause. I have the following sequence. Here I define 3 tables: customers, orders, and output table. The first one is the customers table. It consists of 2 columns, customer ID and name. And it contains the same data, what I showed you before. The second table is the orders table. It consists of 3 columns, order ID, material, and customer ID. It contains also the same data, what I showed you before. The third table is the output table, where I want to store the result. It consists of 4 columns. The first 2 columns, customer ID and customer name, what I want to fill in from the first table. The second 2 columns, order ID and order material, what I want to fill in from the second table. As you see, I use different names for the columns here. So, you don't have to use the same column names here. You can use any name you want. This table is empty now and should be filled in using the LINQ query. Here I have an assign activity to write the LINQ query. The result will be stored in the output table. At the end, I have for each row activity to print out the content of the output table after executing the query. Let's now start writing the query. First, I will write from clause. As mentioned, we use this clause to define the first table, which is customers in this example. Here I define the variable row1 to query the rows of the first table. After that, I will use the join clause in this way. Here I defined a new variable, row2, for the rows of the second table. In this way I defined both tables, what I want to join. Now I will set the condition to join both tables. For the first key, I use the first variable from the first table. The column name here is customer ID. For the second key, I use the second variable from the second table. The column name here is also customer ID. Up to this point I defined both tables, what I want to join, and also the condition using the keys from both tables. Now I want to select the output from the query. As mentioned, I want to store the result in the output table. For that I use the function add with the property rows, to add new rows to this table. As you know, there are 4 columns in this table, therefore I have to add 4 values. The order of the values is very important, therefore make sure you add the correct value in the correct position. The first value will be added to the first column, the second one to the second column, and so on. The first column in the output table is customer ID. I can get this value either from the first table, or from the second table, because both tables contain this value. I will get the value from the first table in this way. Here I wrote the column name, what I have in the first table. So, please make sure you write the name of the column from the table, from which you want to get the value, not the column name of the output table. In this example, the column name is the same in both tables. This value will be added in the first column of the output table. Now I want to add a value for the second column. Here I should add the customer name. I have this value in the first table in the column name. As you see, I used here name, not customer name, because this is the name of the column in the first table. Now I added 2 values for the first 2 columns in the output table. In the same way I will add 2 values for the last 2 columns. The content of these columns is from the second table, therefore I use the variable row2. I also use the name of the columns, what I have in the second table. In this way, I have a value for each column in the output table. At the end I will add copy to data table function, to convert the output to data table. Let's check the query again. In the first line I define the first table, customers. In the second line I define the second table, orders. In the next line I added the condition to join both tables. I use the column name, customer ID, with the variables of both tables, what I defined in the query. After that I use select clause, to select the rows I need as output. The rows will be added to the output table. I have 4 values for the columns of the output table. The first one is from customers table, customer ID column. The second one is also from customers table, name column. The third one is from orders table, order ID column. And the last one is from orders table, material column. At the end I am converting the output to data table. So, the query is ready to execute. Let's run the process to check the output of this sequence. The execution is finished. As you see, I got 3 rows as output from the query. The first one contains the customer ID and the customer name from the first table, and also the order ID and the material from the second table. The same for the second and third rows. This is also the same result, what I showed you before. Let's now adjust the query. I will set the condition in the same line of join clause. I will execute the process again to check if the result will be the same or not. As you see, I got the same result again. So, there is no difference between both queries, if I am writing the condition in the same line of join clause, or if I am writing it in a new line. That's all about joining 2 tables using inner join. In this examples I used only 2 tables, but you can use join clause to combine data from more than 2 sources. Let's check the following example to understand how does it work exactly. I have the same sequence here. I defined a new data table, order details. This table contains 2 columns, order ID and details. The order ID in this table is to connect this table with the second table, orders. For each order ID there are details in the second column. In the output table I defined a new column, order details. So, now this table contains 5 columns. Let's now check the query. As you see, I defined a new join clause after the first one. Here I wrote the clause in the same way, as I did in the first clause. The table here is the new table, order details. The keys here are from the second and the third table. So, here I used the column order ID from both tables to join them. In select clause I added a new value for the last column of the output table. Here I used the variable row 3 to get the value. This value will be added to the last column of the output table. This query is now to combine the data from 3 tables. After the query I have the loop to print out the content of output table. Let's run the process to check the new result. As you see, I got again 3 rows as output. The content of the first 4 columns is the same. But there is a new column, which contains the content from the third table. This is how to use join clause to combine data from 3 tables. You can add so many join clauses as you need, to combine data from more than 3 tables. That's all you have to learn about join clause.